1200 BC, ancient Greece. A warrior stands outside Troy, gripping his spear. He's not thinking about strategy. He's not weighing his options. He's just listening, because Athena is speaking directly into his ear, clear as day, telling him exactly what to do. He doesn't question it, doesn't hesitate, just follows the voice. Because that voice in your head right now, the one reading these words, maybe wondering if you left the stove on, that voice didn't exist yet. Look, I'm not talking about language. I'm talking about that specific voice, the narrator, the commentator, the thing that never shuts up about whether you should text your ex. According to one of the most controversial theories in psychology, humans literally didn't have inner monologue until around 1200 BC. Before that, we heard gods talking to us instead. And the evidence is, honestly, pretty terrifying. This comes from Julian Jaynes, a Princeton psychologist who spent his career studying consciousness. In 1976, he drops this 500-page academic bomb called The Origin of Consciousness in the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind, which sounds like sci-fi, but it's actually an argument that humans were essentially schizophrenic for most of civilization. His basic claim, that voice in your head that goes, "Whoo, pizza for dinner?" didn't evolve until recently. Before that, your brain's right hemisphere would literally speak to your left hemisphere, out loud, in the voice of gods. And you just obey. Which, I mean, that's either the most brilliant theory in psychology or complete academic nonsense. So naturally, it was immediately controversial. But here's the thing about Jaynes' evidence. It's uncomfortably convincing. Let's start with the Iliad. You know Homer's epic about Troy. Everyone knows it. But read it again and pay attention to how decisions get made. Achilles doesn't think about whether to fight. Athena appears and tells him. Hector doesn't wrestle with moral choices. Apollo whispers in his ear. When Agamemnon makes terrible decisions, it's because a god gave bad advice. But that's just poetic language, you're thinking. Mommy, is it? Because here's the weird part. The Iliad never describes anyone thinking, ever. Characters don't deliberate, they don't reflect, they don't have internal debates. They receive divine instruction and act. Which, honestly, kind of massive oversight for a civilization we consider philosophically advanced. Jaynes went through ancient literature systematically, Egyptian texts, Mesopotamian tablets, Hebrew scripture, same pattern everywhere. People don't think, gods think for them. Egyptian pharaohs built massive temples where they'd literally talk to statues. Not metaphorically, they'd ask questions and wait for auditory responses, because that's how brains worked. Ancient Mesopotamian kings kept detailed records of their conversations with Marduk and Ishtar. Not prayers, conversations. Back and forth dialogue about tax policy and military strategy. We always assumed this was religious theater, political legitimacy stuff. But what if it wasn't? What if they were just describing their actual experience? Because here's where it gets really weird. Around 1200 BC, everything changes. Suddenly, ancient literature is full of people having internal experiences. Doubts, self-reflection, that voice going, wait, am I making the right choice here? The timeline is eerily consistent across cultures. 1200 BC is when Bronze Age civilizations collapsed. Egypt fell apart. Mycenaean Greeks disappeared. Hittite Empire vanished overnight. Jaynes' theory, their gods stopped talking. Picture this. You wake up in ancient Mesopotamia, 2000 BC. Sun hits your face. You hear a voice, clear as day, telling you to check the grain stores. You don't question it. Don't think, should I? You just do it. Because the voice isn't coming from you. It's coming from Marduk, your personal god, the right hemisphere of your brain speaking to your left in divine language. You're not crazy. Everyone operates this way. It's just how consciousness works. But then something shifts. Maybe it's cultural complexity. Maybe writing systems disrupting natural brain patterns. Maybe evolutionary pressure. The voice is stop. For the first time in human history, you gotta make decisions yourself. Think about thinking. Develop that narrator voice because the gods aren't narrating anymore. And suddenly, humans are writing about existential dread, about feeling abandoned by divine forces, about this new weird experience of being alone inside your own head. Cool, 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 cool. That's not existentially terrifying at all. Now, obviously, mainstream psychology thinks Jaynes was completely wrong. Evidence is circumstantial. Can't exactly scan Bronze Age brains to check neural patterns. But here's what makes his theory really uncomfortable: the medical evidence. Schizophrenia patients often describe hallucinated voices as gods or divine figures. The voices give commands, provide commentary, sound completely real and external. And schizophrenia, weirdly universal across cultures, about one of every population, always has been, as far back as we have medical records. What if schizophrenia isn't a disorder? What if it's evolutionary throwback? Your brain briefly reverting to the old bicameral system? Which would mean what we call mental illness is actually how human consciousness worked for thousands of years. I mean, that's either brilliant insight or complete pseudoscience, but it would explain some things. Like why ancient civilizations were obsessed with building temples. If you're literally hearing God voices, of course you're gonna build them houses. Why oracle culture was so widespread. If some people still had strong bicameral voices, they'd be incredibly valuable for decision-making. Why prophecy exists in every ancient culture, because some brains still worked the old way. And why religions focus on hearing divine voices. Prayer, meditation, mystical experiences, they're all trying to recreate that direct communication system. Because maybe we miss it. Maybe having to think for ourselves is actually exhausting. Think about it. Every decision you make, you gotta weigh options. Consider consequences. Listen to endless internal chatter about whether you're doing the right thing. But if Marduk just told you what to do, if Apollo gave clear instructions, if your brain's right hemisphere spoke in divine authority, no anxiety, no self-doubt, no existential crisis about whether your life has meaning, just clarity. Of course, there'd be downsides, like zero creativity, no innovation, no questioning authority because authority was literally the voice in your head. Which might explain why human progress accelerated so dramatically after the bicameral mind supposedly broke down. Once we had to think for ourselves, we invented philosophy, science, art, democracy, all the things that require questioning voices of authority. But we also invented neurosis, depression, that constant nagging voice saying you're not good enough. So either Jaynes discovered the most important thing about human consciousness, or he's completely wrong and ancient people were just really into roleplay. Personally, I think the truth is probably somewhere in between. Maybe we didn't literally hear gods, but maybe consciousness is more recent than we think. Maybe that narrator voice, the one listening right now, is actually a pretty new evolutionary development. Maybe for most of human history, people just acted without constant internal commentary, without endless mental chatter about whether they should act. Which honestly sounds kind of peaceful. But here's the really unsettling part. If Jaynes is even partially right, human consciousness isn't fixed. It evolved recently, which means it could evolve again. That voice in your head, the one that feels so fundamentally you, might not be permanent. In a few thousand years, humans might experience consciousness completely differently. The internal narrator might seem as primitive to them as bicameral God voices seem to us. They'll study our literature and think how weird that these people were always talking to themselves. And maybe they'll be right. But until then, we're stuck with the voice, the commentator, the thing that never stops analyzing, judging, narrating every moment of existence. So, you're welcome for that existential crisis. Sweet dreams.